Okay, let's do it. Question number 1, in no particular order. Okay, this is from Coke. Members of the members of the Soviet military, Vasil Arkhipov and Stanislav Petrov, refused to approve nuclear attacks at different times in the Cold War. Would most UK military personnel have done the same? Have you considered refusing in order? The context of this, Marcus was a submariner during the Cold War. Okay, there you go.
It's a very interesting concept, is when is a lawful order lawful? And I think when we were talking about stuff before, and I think there is, within the rules of engagement, we have that ability to question an order. And I think what good officers always have done, in my experience, is when they have their plan, and you'll have known this in your world, it's that question about, right, have I thought of everything? It gives you that freedom to then input into that before a decision is made. I think that's, on a day-to-day basis, that's how good leadership in the military works. When it comes down to the rules of engagement for nuclear deterrent, that's slightly different, because your orders come from, obviously, Prime Minister in our case. There's sealed envelopes which are given to every captain on board a submarine. In the event of loss of communication, or in the event of a command order, those envelopes are opened. Those are the orders the captain has, and then the ship's company will undertake those orders.
Well, interestingly, during the early years of the Cold War, which I've been learning about, the Cold War book I've just been telling you about before we started recording.
Yeah, absolutely.
The US, the US president delegated down responsibility for use of nuclear weapons to the commander on the ground. And I know that was the case in the Korean War, for example. Now, you get the wrong kind of commander in place, things can go pear-shaped very, very quickly.
Yes, no, and there are films that look at that. I mean, there's a famous one with Gene Hackman and Denzel Washington, which, if you look at that, the movie on that one, I can never remember what that one's called, but effectively that looks at where there's a loss of communication.
Movie, yeah,
it's a loss of communication between command and the boat, and the captain decides we're going to do this, and the first lieutenant says that's not a lawful order. No, and there's a mutiny on board. And
Crimson Tide.
Great
movie.
It.
Yeah.
But it looks at that exact scenario. I think the one thing, from my experience, we are drilled to the point that you don't actually think about the order, in the sense that, most deterrent boats will be going to war in exercise format 2 or 3 times a week, all sorts of day of night, because you don't actually think about it. It's why squaddies shoot at pop-up targets. You don't actually, it's muscle memory. You pull the trigger when the target pops up. You don't think about the morality behind taking the shot.
I'm going to disagree with that, and we can talk about it in the podcast.
Yeah, you can do. But that's one of the things the military try and do, is that it's more about impacting that muscle memory than it is about really having long thoughts about what might happen. I mean, my view was always, if the command came, my loved ones are pretty much gone anyway.
Let's come back onto that on the podcast. All right, question 2 from Coke. Generally, members of which branch of the military are better at transitioning into civilian life, and which branch gives the best support for transitioning?
Right, best support at the moment, I think, is Royal Marines, as we were talking about that. And I'm not a Royal Marine, but my son is. But having seen that firsthand, I think that is really interesting what they're trying to do, because there is, certainly in the UK military, I mean, 16,000 a year is the average number that leave every year for a variety of reasons. The bit that are actually forgotten about and are the most vulnerable is often the medical discharge. So you imagine you didn't want to leave and suddenly you suck down the rabbit hole. What does that look like? And some of them, you imagine being, a corporal, sergeant, that sort of 12-year mark. You're married, you're in quarters, maybe your wife's not working, you've got a young family, and suddenly med discharge, and within 60 days you're looking at maybe losing your accommodation and that type of thing. So there's those, but also what about the young squaddies, matlows, and bootnecks and the like who don't complete training? There's those that I want to go in and I want to serve, but the service says you're not for us, or you're injured, need to go out and come back in 2 years. Well, if you've given up a perfectly good job and you're 17, 18 years of age and your absolute mission in life was to do and be a para, for example, and suddenly you fail for whatever reason and you're out, what do you do? Where's the support network for that? So there is a lot of vulnerability, and that's where I think that the charity space does come in. MOD are getting better, certainly with Op Courage and Op Nova and all those sort of support networks that are coming through. But I think the ones that are sometimes easier to transition are some of the RAF, because they tend to go into technology-based or logistic-based roles like for like. They'll come off aircraft and they'll transition to other aircraft or the aircraft industry. They'll move into logistics, which are quite easily transitional. If you're a sniper, what's your skill set? And if you're a sniper that's been med discharged, what's your skill set? How do you define that? How do you reinvent your narrative? And that's the harder thing. So I think some of the technical roles across all three services, but RAF, from my experience, tend to be slightly easier. So.
Okay. Okay, a question now from David, who's the editor of the podcast. You started in submarines, led big teams in energy, and now you are mentoring. What keeps pulling you back to support others?
I think it's the community and the like-minded people. One of the things that I'm very clear on now that I wasn't was your uniform doesn't define you. What defines you is your values, your approach to life. And actually, what people confuse when they're leaving the military is, but the uniform was that, and it's not. The uniform was a mechanism for you to serve, to care about the world, to care about others, to lead others, to mentor others. It was just a mechanism, that's all it was. You would have done it anyway, but you just saw it more of that. The uniform became a tool. And I think I came full circle about 10 years ago when I realised that actually I should stop this is going to sound terrible, but almost ashamed of my service. And because there was an element of, failure when I left and I didn't complete my mission in my head. And a lot of people feel like that. But it took a lot of people, particularly a friend of mine who was a US Marine, to really get me to see, actually, you're not something to be ashamed of. Actually, you have served, you have stood up when others wouldn't. And I think that's what you find the commonality in all. It doesn't matter whether you're in RAF logistics that served 4 years or you've done 32 years and you're a lieutenant colonel. We all have that servitude and we all have similar values. Some of us might be pirate reprobates and thieves, but, underneath all of that, you still care. And it's why you can get into a room with somebody you've never served with, completely different. You can have the crack, you can find common ground, you can find values. And I say 98% of the people that I ever come across in the community, if it was a school football team, you'd want them on your team. As opposed to a lot of civilians, you'd have to spend a fair bit of time with them to understand that. Whereas, you don't in our community. Mm-hmm. So I think that's the key thing.
Okay. That was great advice there as well, by the way. The uniform is not what defines you, and so many people need to learn that lesson.
Yeah.
What is, again from David, what is one myth about leaving the forces you find yourself busting over and over with your mentees?
When they say to me, I'm just a... It's this phrase that just irritates the shit out of me.
I mean, it's valid if they're a bootneck.
Well, there is that.
I'm joking. I can't help it.
You're going to get so much hate, right? I am the dad, though, that I did when my son joined the Marines. I put a pack of 24 Crayola crayons in his bag.
Oh, did you?
And he phoned me and said, "What's that for?" I said, "Well, in case you get hungry, obviously." But this phrase just irritates the crap out of me. And I'll give you a great example. I was at a careers fair last year at Catterick, and this young corporal comes up to me. He's done 6-7 years. And I said, you know, what do you do? He stood there in his MTP, got his Army Air Corps stuff on. And he said, oh, I'm just an Apache technician. I went, so let me just rephrase that then. You are a mechanical, electronics technician on the world's most advanced attack helicopter. He went, well, if you put it that way, well, what other way is there to put it?
Yeah.
And it's that just a. You know, I've got a guy.
That's not even dressing it up.
No.
That's exactly what he does.
Exactly.
Exactly what he does.
A Marine recently, he said, I'm just a driver. And when we pulled that apart, he was, you know, he got responsible for 16 people, a budget of about 2 million quid. His kit was worth about 30 million. He was doing logistics and resource planning, all of that.
Yeah.
But he's just a Marine driver.
Yeah.
And I think that's the big thing that irritates me.
Yeah. Okay, we're back on to Coke's questions. So, question number 3 from Coke. What are the... he does bounce around.
Okay.
What are the positives and negatives of growing old?
One of the positives is and this is when you hit 50, right? So a guy said to me last year, he said, are you over 50 now? I said, yes. He said, right, now you can officially use a word in the English language called wisdom. He said, because you can't use it until you're 50, because you haven't lived enough and screwed up enough to be able to use it. And he said, and it's demonstrable by if you go to the Russian steppes or the Brazilian rainforest, there are elders, and they're not 26-year-old IT graduates, right? So you can use the word wisdom. So that's a positive, all right? And also, I think people give you a bit of a pass when you're a grumpy bastard as well, because he's just old and grumpy. The downside is you can't do the things that you want to do anymore. I work hard in the gym, but it's harder now. And, you know, it's just, you've blinked, and when did that happen? I was talking to a guy recently where he's just had a child, and I said, you know, buy a camera, buy the best camera you can ever buy, take pictures every day, take video every day, because that first 5 years feels like 15, the next 5 years feels like 10, and the next 5 years between 10 and 15 feels like 3 months.
Yeah.
It just accelerates. It's like this mad time acceleration that just happens.
Well, there is a part 2 and 3 to this question, and I'm chuckling because I've just read the rest of it.
Oh,
right.
okay.
So, all right. So I'm going to read the other 3 lines as part of this question. So to continue what Coke said, how different did you become? He posted this without knowing who you are,
No, that's okay.
seen a photo or anything. So he said, how different did you become in each decade of life, given the time of your service, i.e., 1980s, 1990s? I must respectfully conclude you are elderly.
Everything is in context. I'm younger than my dad.
Yeah, exactly. Elderly relative to what?
Absolutely. Relative
maybe the
to
Coke.
what? Yeah, but that, it's quite interesting, isn't it? Because particularly if you watch an old war movie, when, you know, you look at a Sean Connery in, like, you know, I don't know, Bridge Too Far. It's probably my age, but in real life, he would have probably been, you know, 30 at the best, you know, in the war. I mean, it's quite mad how you look at life. I think I'm in a good place now in this decade because there is a bit of, you know, the kids are on a good path. They're all adults now, and, you know, I've got money in the bank. I'm not a millionaire. I've still got a mortgage, but the pressures are slightly different, and you start thinking about the next part of your, you know, when would you retire? What would you do with that? All that sort of fun stuff. That bit in the middle is when you've got all the craziness with the kids, you know, from sort of 30 to 45. I feel there's a lot of pressure there to provide for family, pressure to be successful. Often you lean into that and you actually don't find joy, which is mad because you've got, you know, my kids are the most important thing to me, pardon Mrs. Peters, you know, but, you know, they are my world. But you actually lean into work. And I jokingly said to somebody on a LinkedIn post recently, I gave the best years of my kids' life to a corporate environment. But I did it because to give them better than I had, which I didn't have a lot growing up, you know, to give them better opportunities in life because I fought my opportunities in life. So I think as you get that wise wisdom, you then look at life slightly differently. I think there's also that bit in the middle from leaving the service until I was probably 45, where I just ran away, hid everything. Nobody understood what I did. Afghanistan and Iraq came along, and they were the hot wars. They were visible, and that, you know, they were media. They forgot about us. The Cold War didn't have a defined end. You know, we did what was asked of us, and suddenly a wall falls down in Germany, and like, oh, you're not needed anymore. Let's make a load of you redundant. Let's just, you know, cancel all the orders on the new kit. We'll, you know, just run everything into the ground. And there was a real, like, there was no end to it. You know, there was no natural end. I'm not saying that the pull out of Afghanistan was right. And for a lot of the Afghan vets, I know was very, very painful, particularly when the Taliban took back in charge. But there was a clear media coverage end point. And it was a finite game that you were playing, and the military is a finite game. Unfortunately, life is an infinite game. And that screwed with my head for a very, very long time. And I was, I suppose, ashamed of what I did. I couldn't talk to people about what I did for secrecy reasons. People didn't understand it. One problem with the Navy is it's not like a lot of units where you're with a lot of people in, you know, if you're in, I don't know, Joker Company in 4-2 Commando, you know those guys and you'll move around the commando sphere, but it's a small family. With us, you know, I'd serve with you, and then 3 months into getting to know you, you'd be drafted somewhere else, or you'd be going on a promotion course. So you were having like 3 to 6 month at times rotations with people. You didn't get very, very close bonds. Whereas if you're on the aircraft carriers and that, you tend to be carriers only or small ships only. You tended to knock into the same people a lot. So when you leave, where's your community?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay, last question for the icebreakers. We have got some left, but we're hitting the time limit, so we'll come on to them at the end of the actual podcast. This one, again, is from Coke. Ex-RSM 22 SAS Peter Ratcliffe said that when the captain of HMS Sheffield, Sam Salt, came onto the ship Hermes after his ship was hit in the Falklands, he looked defeated and sat head down in silence. Not a single Royal Navy officer came to the captain to offer condolences, and they ignored him. Ratcliffe recalled reading, "A captain who lost his ship could expect no mercy from the Admiralty." Does this behaviour match what you'd expect, and why did they ignore him? Now, I would like to know this as well. The Navy is a peculiar place. Submariners, submarine service, even more so. Yeah. Even more so.
Well, you do realise we don't parade on Remembrance Sunday.
Okay.
So
no.
We parade a week.
Submarine service.
Submarine service okay. Parade a week before at our own cenotaph, which is down on Embankment, which is the Submarine Memorial. And the reason of that is because after the First World War, when we started to do the cenotaph thing, the Admiralty went, well, we can't have those dirty pirates marching. They don't play war like cricket. War should be done in a certain way. It's underhand. It's not the way things are done. So the Admiralty, that's why the submarine world started itself. It's why that we see ourselves as pirates, reprobates and thieves. It's why when a submarine, like when Conqueror sunk the Belgrano, she came back, she flew the Jolly Roger.
Funny.
Because it was almost like two fingers to the Admiralty, that, and we are seen very differently. When you sort of, the number of times that you'd go around, they go, oh, submariners.
Funny enough, snipers, believe it or not, were also on land wars before, obviously, the sort of the birth of the sniper, I think, not a sniper, but marksmanship in a military context. I think it was the birth of that was the Royal Navy.
Yeah.
But where snipers on land are concerned, especially World War One, and also in the American Civil War, were looked down on by their own troops for much of the same reasons. That's not gentlemanly conduct.
No.
To hide and shoot people. No,
you have to walk up to the line
exactly.
and then just point guns at each other and say, no, fire.
They weren't like, even in their own lines, they weren't liked at all. Even though they're pretty good at what they did, Yeah.
And I can see that, it is my vessel. A captain sees the ship and his people on that ship as his property and his family. And I can understand the loss of losing it. And it's really weird, years later from when I left, we were building a substation at Rosyth. Mm-hmm. So the Rosyth Dockyard were building it on our behalf, and I was going up doing inspections, and it was right in between the two aircraft carriers in build. But when I stood on the top deck of the substation in build, and I looked out across, all of my old submarines are mothball waiting to be turned into razor blades. And there is that little tear in your eye of, that's my home. It's a bit like you watching a forward operating base being demolished and knowing that people have lived and died for that. It was really emotional, and you can't quite connect it. You know, it's a bit like, I don't know if you've ever been to the ABBA thing down in London, and you start whooping and cheering in a different way at avatars, and your brain goes, there's nobody there, why am I cheering? It's like, it's just a rusty piece of metal, why are you getting upset about it? But there is this emotional attachment to it, because it was everything to you, you know. And certainly 2 of those boats saved my life. I shouldn't be here. You know, there were things that went on that boat. I shouldn't be here. For the people on that boat and that the strength of the people who built it, I came home to my loved ones. So
What were you on?
I was on Resolution class. I was on Reso Repulse. I did an O-boat for a short while as well, and I did about a week on a frigate. I actually wanted frigates in Plymouth and ended up in submarines in Scotland. Just how the Ministry of Defence works, you know.
Right.
It's like you said I wanted to be in the catering corps and you ended up in the paras, you know.
That is the end of the icebreaker. If you listen to this in your podcast app, it's going to roll straight into the full podcast. And like I said at the start, if you want to submit questions for future guests and watch or listen live, become a patron of the podcast. Patreon.com/HK Podcast. HughCare.substack.com. That's it. Cool. Next full podcast rolling in, coming in hot.